I was standing at the bottom of the staircase at Harthmore Hall the morning she arrived, and I watched my brother not look at her. That was the thing that stayed with me. He stood in the entrance hall, the same hall where our father had received ambassadors, where the wallpaper cost more than most men earned in a year, and he turned to address his steward about some matter of the east wall drainage, and Miss Nell Carrow walked in through the front door carrying a single traveling bag, and he did not turn. I turned. I always turned when something arrived worth watching. She was not what I had imagined, not in any particular. My brother, the Duke of Harthmore, known in 3 counties as the coldest man in England, a title he had earned without much effort and seemed to carry without discomfort, had agreed to accept a girl as settlement for a debt. Her father, Lord Carrow of Penwick, had borrowed against an estate he no longer possessed, against prospects he had never held, and had lost everything at a rate that suggested either spectacular misfortune or spectacular foolishness, and the evidence pointed firmly toward the latter. The man had a gift for optimism entirely unmoored from reality. He had borrowed in the confident expectation that things would improve, and things had not improved, and the creditors had eventually grown tired of waiting. The debt came to my brother through a chain of other obligations, through a solicitor and a settlement and a conversation I was not present for. He had not sought it. He was not in the habit of seeking things he had not decided to want. The arrangement was simple, in the way that arrangements made between men about women always appear simple to the men making them. Miss Nell Carrow would come to Harthmore Hall as my brothers intended. He would discharge the debt. Her father would escape the courts. She would become a duchess, which was generally considered an improvement on the alternatives, even if the path to it was not what any sensible person would have chosen. I had expected tears. Most women, faced with that proposition, would have been forgiven for weeping. They would have been forgiven for a great many things, for anger, for protest, for arriving pale and shaking and determined to make everyone around them understand the scale of the injustice. I had steeled myself for it. I had even prepared, in the vague way that younger brothers do, to be kind about it, to say the sorts of quiet and well-intentioned things that are almost never useful but that demonstrate, at least, that the effort was made. She did not weep. She walked through the front door of Harthmore Hall on a gray November morning, set her traveling bag down with a soft and deliberate click, took off her gloves, and looked at the entrance hall with the same expression I had seen on soldiers who had walked the length of a hard campaign and arrived somewhere new and were simply assessing what they had to work with. She was slight, dark-haired, composed, not a great beauty, not plain. She had the kind of face that would pass unnoticed in a crowded room and then in a quiet one would not. Her eyes were dark and steady, and they moved around the entrance hall without rush, taking in the height of the ceilings, the sweep of the staircase, the portrait of our grandfather over the fireplace. They did not linger on my brother's back. I introduced myself. I said, "Miss Carrow, I am Lord Edmund Harthmore, my brother's," and I stopped, because what exactly was I to say? His purchase, his acquisition. "His household is glad to receive you," I finished, which was at least partly true in that I was there. "Lord Edmund," she said, her voice was level. "Thank you, I am sorry for the trouble of my arrival." She was apologizing for arriving. She had been sold to settle a debt that was not her making, and she was apologizing for the inconvenience of her presence. My brother turned then, not because she had spoken, I think, but because something in the hall had shifted, a quality of the air, a stillness, and even he felt it. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "Miss Carrow," he said. His voice was what it always was, even without warmth, without particular coldness either, simply exact. The voice of a man who had been taught that every word was an expenditure and had never found reason to revise the lesson. "Your Grace," she said. He turned back to his steward. I watched her watch him do it, and I want to say she flinched or colored or showed something that I could name hurt or affront, but she did not. She simply looked at the back of him for a moment and then looked at me and said, "I expect someone might show me to my rooms." I showed her myself. It was not the done thing, it was the thing I did anyway. The weeks that followed had a particular quality I struggled to name until much later. Harthmore Hall was always a formal house. Our mother had kept it that way, and in her absence the formality had calcified into something colder. But with Miss Carrow in it, the house seemed to become aware of itself in a new way. She did not alter it. She simply moved through it with such self-possession that the house, by contrast, began to seem overdressed for its own occasion. She was quiet at table. Not silent, she spoke when she was spoken to, and her answers were measured and sometimes precise in ways that made the conversation take a turn no one had planned for. She had been well educated, that was clear, not in the decorative sense that education was sometimes applied to women, the languages and the accomplishments and the studied opinions about art. She had been educated in the sense of having actually read things and thought about what she read and arrived at positions that were her own. She knew history. She knew rather a lot of it. She had opinions about it that she did not volunteer but would defend if pressed, with a calm that bordered on devastating. My brother sat at the head of the table and listened to her do this once on the question of the northern trade routes and their disruption through the previous generation, and something moved briefly behind his eyes before it did not. He said nothing. He rarely did, but he listened in a way that was different from the way he listened to most conversations, which was to say with something other than tolerance. He was not unkind to her. I want to be accurate about this because it would be easy to paint him as the villain of the piece, and that would not be fair to what I actually witnessed. He was simply absent. Not physically, he was present at every meal, at the drawing room in the evenings, in the library on the occasions when she chose to read there, which she did often. He was there in body. In attention, he was somewhere else. He had been somewhere else, I thought, since the war. Since the things he had seen in the war that he never described, about which I knew only what could be read in the set of his jaw, and the particular way he sometimes held himself still, as though the stillness were an effort. He had accepted this arrangement. I had understood from the start, not because he wanted a wife, but because he had not been able to find a way to say no that satisfied his conscience. His solicitor had presented it to him, and he had sat with it for several days, and then said yes. He was a man of his word, which is another way of saying he sometimes paid for obligations that were not entirely his to pay. I thought, watching him not watch her at the library fire, that he regretted it, not her specifically, the situation, the unfairness of it to both of them. She seemed, for her part, to have made a private arrangement with herself about the whole affair, the terms of which I could not entirely read. She was not miserable. She was not happy. She was present in the way that people who have decided to make the best of things are present, thoroughly, efficiently, without complaint, with a kind of steady attention to whatever was in front of her. She learned the names of every person in the household within a fortnight. She asked the housekeeper about the East Wing repairs, the same East Wing my brother had been discussing with the steward the morning she arrived, and made a suggestion about the drainage that the housekeeper brought to my brother, and my brother implemented without ever, to my knowledge, acknowledging that the suggestion had come from her. I told her it had worked. She said, "Good," and turned back to her book. My brother announced in early December that the household would travel north to Daleford for the winter gathering at Crownmere Lodge, a habit of many years, involving some 14 guests, 3 carriages, and the kind of luggage that required a wagon of its own. Miss Carroll was included without comment. He did not ask whether she wished to go. It would not have occurred to him to ask. She was part of the household now. The household went to Crownmere. I rode alongside the first carriage and watched the sky close in above the Daleford passes with the feeling I had learned, in 37 years of living in the north of England, to take seriously. The color of it, the weight of it, the particular silence that preceded the kind of weather that meant business. The driver on the first carriage had the same feeling. I could see it in the set of his shoulders. We made Crownmere Inn by 4 in the afternoon, which was fortunate. By 5, the snow was moving sideways. The inn was adequate. Crownmere had been a coaching stop for 2 generations, and it knew how to receive a winter party in a hurry. The innkeeper, a solid man named Gregor, put the ladies in the upper rooms and the gentlemen below, and organized the serving of a dinner that was warm if not elegant. And for an hour or so, the gathering had about it the particular giddiness that an unexpected adventure lends to people who are used to things going according to plan. The wine was open, the fire was substantial, and the party had achieved that contented temporary suspension of concern that characterizes people who are certain the difficulty is behind them. The difficulty was not behind them. Then the roof began. It started as a sound, a low creak from above the dining room that I noticed and most of the others did not. Then a second creak longer with a different quality. Then Gregor's face changed, and I knew before he spoke. "The snow load," he said, appearing at the dining room door with his hat in his hands. "The central beam above the East Wing upper rooms, I had it inspected last spring, but this is the weight of this," he stopped. He was a practical man overwhelmed, which is a harder thing to watch than a dramatic man overwhelmed. The ladies will need to come down, if the beam goes. The dining room became, in the following 2 minutes, a scene of some chaos. Lady Montherwick fainted, which was not helpful. Her husband began shouting at Greta about the structural standards of northern coaching inns, which was less helpful. 2 of the younger men from the party started a discussion about who ought to go upstairs first, which collapsed quickly into an argument about precedence, of all the godforsaken topics. My brother stood at the head of the table and looked at the ceiling, and I could not tell from his face what he was thinking, and knew from experience that asking him would produce no immediate answer. I was looking for the staircase when I realized Miss Caro was no longer in the room. She had already gone up. I found this out because 2 minutes later she came back down again with Lady Montherwick's maid on one arm and old Mrs. Dalloway, who was 73, and had been complaining about her hip since before we left Harthmore, on the other. Behind her came 3 more of the ladies in various states of disarray, following her as though she had told them to follow her, and they had, without thinking, obeyed. "The far east room is the one in question," she said to my brother as she arrived at the bottom of the stairs, still holding the maid and Mrs. Dalloway. "The others are sound. The innkeeper's wife tells me the west side was repaired 2 seasons ago. There are 2 men still up there, Jenkins and your brother's footman. Jenkins has twisted his knee on the stairs." She delivered this as a report, not a plea for instruction, a report. My brother looked at her. "Jenkins will need carrying," she said, "or assistance at least, someone steady." "I'll go," I said. "Yes," she said, as though this had already been settled, "and I'll come with you. Greta," she raised her voice without raising it, which is a skill I had not seen before, a volume that carried without apparent effort. "Greta, we'll need the kitchen to be cleared for the overflow and the blankets from the supply room on the ground floor and hot water as soon as the kitchen fire allows. Can your wife manage the kitchen?" "Yes, ma'am," said Greta, who was looking at her with an expression I recognized as the look of a man who has been in a tight place and has just found the only other competent person in the room. "Good," she said and turned to me. "Lord Edmund, shall we?" We went up. Jenkins was a big man, heavier than either of us could have managed alone, but between myself, the footman, whose name was Prescott and who had more sense than half the gentlemen downstairs, and Miss Caro directing from behind, we got him down the stairs without anyone falling. She had, I noticed, already bound his knee with a strip torn from the hem of her own traveling cloak. Neatly done, evenly wound. When I asked her afterward, she said only that she had read her father's medical books in her youth, as there had been little else to read. Of course she had. The next 4 hours were the kind that seem very long while you are in them and very compressed in memory. The snow continued to press down on the inn with a focused persistence, as though it had taken the place personally. The central beam held, it held all night, as it turned out, and the catastrophe did not come. But we did not know that during those hours, and ignorance of a disaster's absence does not much reduce the tension of anticipating it. What I remember, in the compressed and simplified way that one remembers the important things. The kitchen, reorganized by Miss Caro and Greta's wife into a warm and functional space that held 12 people and a fire, and produced, at intervals, soup and tea and one remarkable meat pie whose origins I never fully understood. Jenkins settled near the fire with his knee elevated on a folded tablecloth, and his face gradually returning from white to something nearer its natural color, because she had given him willow bark in hot water and told him, firmly, to drink all of it. Lady Montherwick, revived from her faint and placed in a chair and furnished with tea, eventually describing Miss Caro to old Mrs. Dalloway as extraordinarily capable, which was, from Lady Montherwick, approximately as high a distinction as it was possible to receive. And my brother. He did not take up space in the crisis. He did not shout directions or make the chaos about himself in any way. He stood at certain points and sat at others, and was useful when usefulness was required, and was quiet in a way that was different from his usual quiet. His usual quiet was the quiet of a man who has decided not to engage. This quiet was the quiet of a man watching something he could not look away from, and choosing not to break it. He watched her with the soup. He watched her with Jenkins. He watched her speak to the frightened young maid who had not stopped shaking since the dining room, crouching down to her level, saying something I could not hear, staying until the shaking stopped. He watched her move through that kitchen as though it were entirely ordinary to be stranded in a coaching inn on a mountain pass in a blizzard with 12 people depending on her good sense, as though extraordinary circumstances were simply circumstances, and what mattered was what you did with them. He did not speak to her directly that night, not once. But he did not look away. The storm broke before dawn. I know because I was awake to see the light change, the particular quality of the darkness becoming less dark, and then the wind dropping, and then a silence so complete it was almost audible in itself. The snow had stopped. Outside the kitchen window, the pass was transformed into something that had no relationship to roads or destinations, only white and silence and the faint gray light of a winter morning asserting itself. I found my brother at the kitchen fire a little after 6. He was the only one there. Miss Carrow had gone to lie down somewhere around 2 in the morning, only when I had pointed out that there was nothing left to be done, and she had looked at me for a moment with a steady look, and then conceded the point, which I had found oddly touching. The rest of the party was asleep in various rooms. It was just the two of us, the fire and the particular quality of the morning after a thing. "Edmund," he said, which was his way of inviting conversation without precisely initiating it. "The pass should be clear by midday," I said. "Greta thinks we can be moving by early afternoon." He nodded, he looked at the fire. "Jenkins will manage the return journey if we take it slowly," I said. He nodded again. "Remarkable woman," I said, which was my way of opening the door and standing back to see what he did with it. He was quiet for a long time. The fire shifted. "I am not what she deserves," he said at last. Not self-pity. I knew what self-pity sounded like in my brother, and it was not this. This was something nearer an assessment. I accepted the arrangement because I could not find an argument against it that satisfied my conscience. Her father made an obligation. It came to me. She required a resolution. That is, he stopped. That is not a sufficient foundation for a life. "No," I agreed, "it isn't. She did not choose this." "No." "She did not protest it either," he said, and the careful neutrality in his voice was, I thought, doing a great deal of work. "She simply arrived, and she has been." Another pause. He was a man who had fought in 3 campaigns and never found it necessary to explain the battles afterward, and he was finding, I thought, that the vocabulary for this was considerably harder. "Present," he said finally, "without complaint. Without performance, she has simply been present." "I noticed," I said. "And last night." "Yes." He was quiet again, a long, cold, northern morning quiet. "I have not been present," he said. Not in the way she has. I accepted an obligation, and I have not." He stopped, set his jaw. "I have kept my word in the letter and not in the spirit." "Nicholas," I said, which I rarely called him, because he was the Duke and Nicholas was something that required occasion. "What are you proposing to do about it?" He looked at me. His eyes in the gray morning light were very dark and very direct, and entirely without the distance I was used to finding there. "I intend to speak to her," he said. "Good," I said. "It may not go well." "It may not," I said. "But you are the only one who can know that." He looked at the fire for another moment. Then he stood, straightened himself to his full height, which was considerable, and which he generally carried without particular awareness, as men who have always been tall often do, and left the kitchen. I stayed by the fire. I thought this was the decent thing to do. I do not know exactly what he said to her. I have my reconstruction of it, assembled afterward from the small pieces she gave me over time and the slightly larger pieces he gave me never, because Nicholas does not give large pieces of anything to anyone, but will occasionally, in moments of particular trust, permit a sentence or two. I know that he found her in the small sitting room off the main corridor, the one with the window that looks out over the pass, and that she was already awake and at the window, watching the gray and white of the pass coming into its morning light. I know that he stood in the doorway for a moment before she heard him. I know that he told her the arrangement was dissolved, that she was free to go if she chose, that the debt was discharged. He had discharged it. He told her plainly, the morning after her father had presented the scheme, before he had agreed to any of the rest of it, because he could not comfortably hold both the debt and the woman, and he had discharged the simpler of the two first. She had come to Harthmore Hall, in other words, owing nothing and held by nothing, and he had not told her, and that was the thing for which he most needed to apologize. I know that she turned from the window when he said this. I know that he told her he wished her to stay, not because of obligation, not because of the circumstances. Because he had watched her for 6 weeks at his table and in his library and in his household. And then he had watched her for 4 hours in a crisis that had reduced 14 other people to various degrees of uselessness. And he had understood something that he had not had the correct words for until this morning, which was that there was a quality of character he had not believed he would encounter, and he had encountered it. And he was very much afraid he had encountered it in the form of a woman who had every reason to leave the moment she understood she was free to do so. He told her he was not easy to live with. He told her he was aware of this. He told her he had been given to understand, by the evidence of 39 years, that warmth was not his first or most accessible quality. He was telling her the truth, he said, because it seemed to him that she was a person who preferred truth to performance, and he had no performance to offer her. What she said I have only in pieces, but I have the piece that matters, which he told me once, very briefly, on a winter evening some years later, when the two of us were sitting by a fire much like this one, and I asked him, as I had never quite managed to ask before, what she had said. He said she had looked at him for a moment with those steady dark eyes, and she had said, "Your Grace, I have read your character for 6 weeks, and I have formed my own conclusions. You need not sell yourself short on my account. You are a great deal more than you claim." And then she had said, "I would like to stay." They were married in February, quietly in the chapel at Harthmore Hall. I stood beside my brother and watched him watch her walk toward him, and the thing I noticed, the thing I have thought about since, was his stillness. Not the old stillness, the effortful one, the stillness of a man keeping a door closed. A different stillness. The stillness of someone who has arrived somewhere and has decided, fully and without reservation, to remain. She wore no great gown. The household had offered, and she had accepted something that was both appropriate and understated, in the manner of a woman who knows what she is without requiring the dress to do the work for her. She carried a small bunch of winter greenery from the kitchen garden, because she had asked for flowers and been told honestly that flowers in February were a challenge, and she had said, "Then greenery is fine," and that was that. Lady Montherwick wept very quietly in the second row. Old Mrs. Dalloway approved of everything in loud whispers. Jenkins, whose knee had healed well but not perfectly, sat in the front row on the aisle and looked at the floor with the expression of a man who has been shown something he did not expect and is quietly rearranging his understanding of the world. I watched my brother take her hand. I had seen him in battle once in my youth, not the later campaigns, but the first one, when I had been attached to the regiment for a summer as an observer and had seen him in command and had understood for the first time why men followed him. It was not charm. It was not warmth. It was something simpler, the certainty he radiated that the situation could be managed, and that he would manage it, and that the people around him would not be left alone in it. He radiated the same certainty now, holding her hand in the chapel at Harthmore Hall. But it was pointed at a single person instead of a field, and it was not certainty about a battle. It was certainty about her, about the fact of her. About the particular, specific, irreplaceable fact of this woman who had walked into his entrance hall in November with a single traveling bag, and no tears, and more composure than anyone had a right to, and had quietly, without announcement, become the thing the house was organized around. I heard him speak the words. I heard her speak hers. Her voice, as it had been from the first morning, was level and clear and without unnecessary emphasis, because she said the things she meant and did not require the words to be dressed up beyond their meaning. Then the minister had finished, and my brother, the Duke of Harthmore, the coldest man in 3 counties, the man who had come back from the war a decade ago and had not since permitted anyone to see him at anything less than full control. My brother cupped her face in both his hands, gently, the way you might hold something that had survived a great distance and arrived intact, and looked at her for a moment before he kissed her brow. The cold was over. I had not even noticed it going. I have thought in the years since about the morning in the Crownmere kitchen, and what it was that shifted. Because something did shift, and I am the only one who was there for all of it, for her arrival, for the evenings at the library, for Jenkins and the soup and the 4 hours in the storm, for my brother's quiet by the kitchen fire at 6 in the morning. And I have been trying, in the way that younger brothers try to make sense of the people they love, to put it rightly. I think it was this: my brother had been at war, not just the campaign, all of it. The management of a great estate, the weight of an old name, the effort of maintaining the authority that was expected of him. The distance he kept from everything was not indifference, it was discipline. He had been trained, by birth and by experience, to hold himself at a remove from the things that might undo him, because the things that might undo him were many, and undoing was not permitted. What he had not expected, what I think had not been in any of his calculations, was someone who made composure look like love, who held steady not because she was performing steadiness, but because it was genuinely what she was, who moved through Harthmore and through Crownmere and through the whole of it with the same quality. Present, exact, without complaint, with a quiet attention to whoever and whatever was in front of her. She did not require him to be different. She did not ask him to perform a warmth he did not have. She had looked at him steadily in the gray morning of a coaching in on a mountain pass, and told him he was more than he claimed, and she had been right, and he had known she was right, and that a woman who saw him accurately and was not disturbed by what she saw was the thing he had given up expecting and had therefore not known to look for. He found it, or it arrived, in a single traveling bag without fanfare on a gray November morning, apologizing for the trouble of its arrival. I told her once that he had worried it would not go well. She looked at me with that steady look and said, "I know, he told me." And I told him I had already decided to stay, she said, before he asked. He had come to tell me I was free, and I had already made up my mind, and it seemed a shame to waste all that courage he had worked up, so I let him ask. She smiled then, small and private, the smile of someone holding a memory they are in no hurry to share further. I did not press. Some things a younger brother understands are not his to know. What I know is this: the debt that brought her to Harthmore was the smallest thing about her, and the man who accepted her as settlement got, in the end, something worth considerably more than he had bargained for, and the best part of it was that she knew that, and did not hold it over him. She simply stayed. And the house, which had been cold for a long time, was not cold anymore.